Hi, this is our group for the discussion of the second third of our book, The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. I'm Jesse Bailey.
I'm Holly Reichle.
I'm Shyamala Krishnakumar.
And I'm Whitley Griffith.
So we're going to start off our, I guess we're just going to say what happened in the second third.
We're going to discuss and know what the underlying meaning and everything that's going on.
So in the first two, I guess you would call them like sections or chapters of the second third, it's talking about how Jeanette and her siblings are like in their new house in Phoenix, and they're like marveling over how big it is and all of the different scenery that they see there. And
This was right after, because the first half ended in the car ride over to their mother's house, so their grandparents' house, and Jeanette had just figured out that her grandmother had passed away, and she was wondering why her mom wasn't upset about it. And then it cuts to the next section, which is them pulling up at one of the houses that was owned by their grandmother. And it was basically a mansion, and the first few pages are just them driving up, and then it's a bunch of imagery about what the house looks like and the area around the house and stuff like that.
so this is also where the three older children enroll in public school, and Jeanette has her first, I believe it's ear and eye exams,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and then like
They found out
Lori?
like her sister needs glasses,
Yeah.
and then her parents think that they don't need glasses because they just makes your eyes weaker.
Wait, let's just talk to each other and not like stare at the camera, because I feel like Miss Simmons will be like.
Okay, and then the sister gets glasses because the school gives them to her for free, and then
Yeah, and the mom again is giving an excuse of why she doesn't like glasses, because you think your eyes need to exercise in order for them to get better. She said that they were like crutches.
But even though the mom doesn't let her get it, the school provides her with free glasses, correct?
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think she's very marveled about all the new sights that she can see.
Right after she gets the glasses, she realizes how
much she'd been missing.
Yeah, on the trees, she saw the little leaves and stuff, and she was asking her sister and her brother, like, have you all seen that the entire time? And they were like, yes.
Yeah. And it goes into now that she can see better, she now wants to be like her mom and do art and stuff, and they turn the first room or couple rooms in the house into like art studios for them to work on art. Yeah.
I think also the fact, sorry, were you gonna say something? I was gonna say, I think also the fact that she was so excited and so happy about the fact this like small little thing that she could see these such small details was just reflective on the fact that nothing else in their life like was exciting or happy. Like everything was scary, and everything they didn't know what else was going on, where they were going, where they were living, what was happening. And this one
So
thing,
it gave her comfort.
Yeah.
Give her comfort to see the
Exactly.
things she'd been missing. I think also in this chapter, in this chapter, the dad gets the job. Yeah, the dad gets like jobs, and he eventually can buy the kids bikes.
Yeah, because he's an electrician, right? Yeah. And then this shows like during this time their family was becoming more stable than they were before, and it just gave them like hope, I guess, that they were gonna.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna add on that this also gave Jeanette like something to look forward to and something to give her hope, and she always found the bright side of things, even though they were still considered like poor. This is like the best they've ever lived throughout their lives, because they've been moving everywhere, and she found like happiness in like the small things.
She also, when they were talking about the bikes and how her father was like, oh, come outside, I have a surprise for you guys, she didn't even believe that the bikes were for her or her sister. She was talking about how she was looking around at Lori and how she was so used to her parents neglecting her that she thought that at first some other kids might have left them there because she just didn't believe that her dad could have afforded or would have thought about getting them stuff like that, because they were always selfish and they just put themselves before their children.
And also, with them getting new bikes, they also got new stuff that most people think are normal, like a washer and dryer and like running water, like stuff like that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and then it talks about how they got their own telephone and how they never had a telephone before, and just stuff like that. And then it goes into the washing machine. And then it talks about how even how they had all these appliances, like the washer and dryer now, they still had so many cockroaches around their house because they did not go out of their way to kill them, and they also were not really sanitary because they weren't used to having their own house or anything like that. They also had termites, it says. So they just had so much going on. And then the mother wouldn't even let them use chemicals to kill them. So at night, the kids would just go out and kill the roaches that they saw because there were so many, which is so unusual. Like, if you think about that, none of us probably do that when we were kids, and like no one else probably did that.
Yeah. And then with the next chapter, do you want to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
One of y'all got it.
So, in the next chapter, isn't this where? Oh, when Jeanette. Okay, so when her mom was painting, they would leave the windows open and the doors open, and this was really dangerous at night. But her parents just thought it would be okay, and
they also did this because they didn't have any air conditioning or they didn't want to pay for it. So they were like, "Oh, it keeps the air in." So they also did that.
So, one time, a man walked into their house and touched Jeanette, but then after he left, the dad took her and I think it was her younger siblings.
Yeah.
To go on like a hunt to find the guy, but they never did. But it just shows how their dad was careless, and they still didn't close the windows or the doors later.
Yeah.
It just made them like going out and searching for someone is one more dangerous, just because if you run into somebody and like they're probably trying.
Yeah, because she brought up how she wanted to close the doors. She was like, "Please, can we close the doors?" Like, I didn't like that happened.
Yeah.
After she told the dad, and yeah, they went and they searched for the guy. They didn't find him, and then she begged their parents to close the doors, and they said that they needed the fresh air. They said it was essential that we refused to surrender fear. So they just, everything, even in the first chapter, the first section where we were talking about, the parents just keep giving excuses to the children when they're like, "Why don't we have this? Why don't we have food to eat? Like, can like get a job?" They just are giving all these excuses like, "Oh, you should face your fears, you should do this, you should do this," and they're trying to make them into life lessons, which in reality the children are having to teach themselves all these things because their parents aren't giving them any sufficient information to.
And also their parents weren't very, I guess they weren't very nice to them in a way. So being like hit or doing stuff out of the ordinary that most people wouldn't go through, they didn't feel it was that like big of a thing. I guess
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't feel like it was a big deal that the man just came into their house.
Yeah, because they just, all this stuff had happened to them when they were younger and stuff like that.
The next chapter, it's talking about how city life is like being stressful on their dad and how he thinks that the city is like pervasive and it it's like an incorrect view of wildlife.
Yeah.
Like how
And also, sorry, do you say?
like how in the zoo, I believe they were talking about how
That comes later, but at first the whole thing that spawns that where they take a trip to the zoo later in this chapter, and it's because they weren't in the car, I don't think, but they heard on the radio that some woman had killed a mountain lion behind her house, or the police shot the mountain lion because she called them because she saw it in her backyard. And then her dad got very offended and said that no animal, no matter how big or wild, isn't dangerous as long as you know what you're doing.
Yeah, and also with that, when they went to the zoo, he stuck his hands in the, what was it, lion or tiger or something? Thing.
The lion.
Yeah,
Lion,
and
I think.
it licked him.
Cheetah. It was a cheetah.
Yeah,
cheetah.
and it licked him. So he was trying to show his kids like, oh, animals can be nice, but it was like it's not really a good example because animals at the zoo are trained.
Yeah, and they could have gotten hurt. They
Yeah,
just continue to put their children in situations where their children could get hurt. Especially this relates back to the whole U-Haul situation in the last section where they were like, okay, we're moving. There's not enough space in the truck. Get in the back of the U-Haul with a newborn baby.
Yeah,
too.
and it can teach them like, oh, I can just walk up to a cheetah and pet it. Like, no, because you can get hurt if it wasn't a trained one in the zoo.
I think that also adds to how her family had a very unconventional and like unusual way of teaching the lessons that they want to teach their kids. Although most people don't agree with it, they feel like it's the way that they should bring up their kids.
Yeah. And it also talks about how, even Jeanette, when she was going to pet the cheetah, because she did it after her dad did, she was asking, she was like, may I pet him please? And the dad was like, oh, of course, even though he had no authority to like say that because they didn't own the zoo or anything like that.
Yeah, he even got in trouble. There was
Yeah.
a woman that was like yelling at him that he should be arrested.
Yeah, because she was defending her dad, and she said, it's all right, my dad does stuff like this all the time. And the fact that her dad does stuff like that all the time is just relating back to the fact that they
Have poor parenting.
Yeah, that's all that they know, that their parents aren't like normal.
And their parents also use like this saying like, oh, God will understand, God will forgive us if they did something wrong, and they used it as an excuse, and they were kind of like proven wrong.
Yeah, they said that earlier when their mom was like, oh, it's hot outside, go play in the fountain to cool off. And how they went to church the next day, I'm pretty sure, and their father was drunk, and they were embarrassed, obviously, because their father was drunk at church. And then the mom says, don't worry, God understands, he knows that your father is a cross we must bear. So they just have all these like, they're like, oh, it's fine because of this.
Yes. Okay, and
And then Jeanette's dad loses his job.
Yeah.
And again, the children are hungry, and they couldn't even afford to get lunch at school, which was only a quarter. So
yeah.
that would suck.
But it was only a brief period of time that their father had a steady job. Every other time he was either like running from the FBI or something. It was just a list of a bunch of excuses where he was like, oh, I can't get a job, I'm doing this. Or he just had random jobs where he was paid for only that certain amount of time. So he never had a steady job until then. And that brief period of time, they were so grateful for like the bike because they'd never had anything like that. The washer, the dryer, like all that stuff. And then after he lost his job, which was just a short amount of time, that they went back to how it was before.
And when he lost his job, it caused him to become like a drunk. And he, one time around Christmas, they had decorated the house and everything, and he set the Christmas tree on fire, and it ended up burning the presents. And the mom, I think...
In the tree.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he just sat on the couch laughing while everyone else was trying to put out the fire.
I think this was when they thought that they were going to have the best Christmas yet.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, where was it? The mom says, I have a really good feeling about Christmas this year. And she was saying how like they should celebrate on the actual day instead of doing it a week later like they had before.
Yeah, because they would always wait a week later so they could get all their Christmas, like the stuff on sale, and they'd be able to afford it.
Because they've never had this money during this time period, or that much money at all.
Yeah.
So they felt like they were finally going to have a real Christmas.
Yeah, at the bottom of page 113, the mom says, I have a really good feeling about this Christmas. And then Lori pointed out that the last few months had not gone well. And then the mom says, it's God's way of telling us to take charge of our own fates. God's help those who help themselves. So then that was the day that the dad came home and got drunk and then ruined the Christmas. And then at the end, Jeanette says, when Dad went crazy, we all had our own ways of shutting down and closing off, and that's what we did that night. They all just went to their rooms, and then no one like cleaned anything up. Everyone was just like, well, our Christmas is ruined, so they went to sleep. So they just, at the point they gave up, they were like, okay, there's no dealing with the situation. Like, what are we gonna do? Yell at him? He's not gonna stop drinking, obviously.
Yeah, that's kind of how they had to deal with their father for their whole lives.
Yeah, most of their problems, when their parents stuck them in them, they couldn't get out of them because obviously they were their parents and they lived with them and they had to endure everything that their parents put them through. So most of the time they would just give up.
And also when their dad was drunk, he would yell, like during that Christmas thing, he yelled stuff about how the things that the Bible said about God that he said wasn't right or was wrong. And one of the quotes he says, and Jesus H. Christ is the world's best loved bastard, and he just talks about how much it's wrong and how much like God won't help you or whatever when you're down. Yeah.
Okay, so then it goes into the next chapter, which is talking about how she turned 10 and how the first thing that she did when she turned 10 is that her parents usually don't, or their parents in general, like the children, they usually didn't really get them anything as a present. Last time that I think it was Christmas, actually. It wasn't when anyone turned a certain age, but the dad took them outside when they were like living in the desert and was like, okay, everyone, for your present, pick a star. And they were like, what? You can't like own a star. And he was like, oh yes, of course you can. If no one else like not buys it, but like claims it before you, then it's yours. And so Jeanette was like, oh, okay. And so for her birthday this year, her dad took her outside and was asking her what she wanted. And he said how it was a special occasion because she's turning 10 and everything. And she says how the one thing that she wants truly, the only thing she wants is for her dad to stop drinking.
I think when she said that, it showed that she still has love for her parents no matter what they do and stuff. She just still finds her family to be very loving, and she thinks that her dad is like the best dad, but she just wants him to be a better person.
Yeah.
And didn't he like for a week stay in his room like?
Yeah,
tied to
he
his
like
bed?
tied
Yeah.
himself to his bed.
Yeah, and he was just, which makes it seem like he's like a nice father. He's trying to do what his daughter wanted, which
Because
was
he
just
promised
hard
he
for him.
would.
Yeah.
He did. He at the bottom of the page when she's like, please, Dad, will you please stop drinking? She like believes in him, and she's the only one who's like believes in everything that he says, and still believes that he's a good father. The other children, Lori especially, is like, Dad is a drunk. We've given up on him. And so
Then when he does this, after he's been like sober for a week, they go on a road trip, right?
do they?
And they
To the Grand Canyon.
yeah, to the Grand Canyon. And when they are on their way there, their car breaks down, which like makes the father angry and it makes him mad. And when they come back home, I guess he starts drinking again because he just like feels like a failure. And
Yeah, and even after the car breaks, because in the car when it does break, we're driving, and the father was like, "Oh, Jeanette, how fast do you think I can make this car go?" And she was like, "Oh, faster than light or something." I don't even know. But so he accelerates really fast, and then something shudders, and then the car breaks down, and then all the kids and the mother, they're freaking out. They're like, "What are we gonna do? We don't have a car." And Jeanette is like, "It's fine. Dad will fix it." So she's still, yet again, the only one who believes in him. Everyone else is like, "Well, what are we gonna do? Our car's broken." And Jeanette's like, "It's okay."
Yeah, but then another car pulls over and offers them a ride, and she offers
Yeah.
the kids sandwiches and drinks, and Dad, like their dad,
yeah.
who was like I don't know, like inspired by this charity, when they get back home, he just returns back to drinking.
Yeah.
Which is not good, but
Inspired? What do you mean?
what do you mean, inspired?
By what?
He was inspired by the generosity of the.
He's like people
drink
can help.
again?
Yeah, like no, like people can help him.
Yeah.
So why does he need to?
Oh.
Why does he need to change if
If-
he can just get help from other people?
Oh, man, that stinks. Them kids.
All right. And
Oh
then-
yeah, and then at the end, after the people in the car who were driving them home, because they started walking, and then these people were like, "Are you okay? Do you need to ride home?" And they were like, "Oh, okay." Which I think is weird, because I remember later in this section, something was happening where I think Jeanette was gonna get old clothes from someone, and her mom made her return them because she was like, "We don't take handouts. Like does anyone else remember that, or am I?"
Yeah.
I don't remember where I was, but
Yeah.
but I just thought it was weird. Okay, but then at the end, it talks about how the person who's driving them home was like, "Oh, here's some water. Those poor kids must be dying of thirst," and how they were really offended, especially Jeanette, because she was like, "We're not poor." And then the lady was like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you."
And to add on to that, I think the reason why the mom is so unconventional and the dad is an alcoholic is because of the fact that they can't provide their children with the life they want to provide them with, but they just can't because they're in poverty and they can't afford to give them the life they want, which is why like the dad came up with the idea of the glass castle and everything, which is to give them hope for their future, and even though they can't provide them with that, they want them to know that it's possible.
Yeah, and also with this, their parents seem to always be giving suggestions or giving them hope of like what they could live in, but they're not doing anything to fix it. They're not doing anything to be like, "Oh, well, if y'all want to go to school and have money in a nice house, let's everyone like get a job or do whatever."
Yeah, they include the children in how that it's also their fault. So they put half of the blame on the children,
Yeah.
most of the blame, because they're like, "You guys could get a job too," but they're young. They're 10, 11 years old. Jeez.
All right, and then go
Like,
the
of
next.
course, they don't like need that responsibility to get a job. Like, they need to go to school, they need to learn, and
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay, so then after they return home by
From the
car
road
ride.
trip.
Yeah.
So after that, I think her parents were like fighting, and she was like, they were yelling at each other, her mom and her dad, and they asked her to like go get a knife, and they were fighting, and then all of a sudden her parents just started laughing and hugging each other.
Yeah.
Which was really weird, I guess.
I literally pointed in the book and I said very strange.
Yes, yeah.
Because after they came home, the father was getting drunk again, and of course their parents got in a fight because they loved each other, I think, and the mom got upset when the father got drunk, and yeah, they were fighting, and then they like pulled a knife on each other, and then they just started laughing, and the children were like, what the heck? And then after this happened, there was no more money coming in at this point because the dad was drinking and he didn't have a stable job, so they really didn't have any money, because any money that was coming in from either the mom or unconventional jobs that the father had, why is it so loud? It was spent on alcohol.
Yes.
And then they started talking about moving east to West Virginia to where their dad's parents lived.
Yeah.
Because their house and everything that they had they didn't have money for it, so they had to move.
Yeah, they didn't have money to like, keep up with anything. So then they ended up moving to West Virginia, which was where
they picked up a really cheap car to move there.
Yeah,
and,
because
like
they
the
didn't
whole
have a
time
car.
it was like shuddering.
Oh yeah, and then right after that they were talking about buying the car, they started talking about the mom, because they got in this fight, and then the mom was gonna leave. She wanted to leave and go take the kids away because this place wasn't. Yeah, they were talking about how the mom was a bad driver, and it talked about a while ago when she was driving through town and there was no brakes in the car, so the children were like hanging out of the windows and they were screaming. They were like, no brakes, which is so like that you don't even think that would happen. Like you read it and it just sounds so crazy that you just think that would never happen, but it happened to them. Like they lived through that.
Yeah, because like their mom had to drive whenever their dad was too drunk, and both of their parents were just horrible drivers. Yeah. And then, which is really says something about their parents. Like they would put their kids in that situation to get in a car accident with like a car with no brakes.
Oh yeah, we're gonna pause for a second. Come on.
All right. And then
Yeah, just restart what you were saying.
Okay, what were you saying? Oh, how the mom had to drive sometimes.
And then how this shows that their parents aren't really.
Not too, but Chris and the older brother, right?
1 second.
Ethan, Antonio, and Krishnakumar.
Are you done?
Okay, and then so this shows how her
Just
parents.
hold on a second. We'll just make it a little bit more than 30
please don't
minutes.
count off. There wasn't many places we could go.
Every other group is staying after today, so
Yeah.
there's literally nowhere else where people aren't. Okay.
Wait.
Okay.
Wait. Okay, so this just shows how her parents they put all of the children in situations where they could get hurt, like especially with a car with no brakes, like that could be really severe, especially if they're going really fast and they slam into someone, or like they could potentially die. So,
Yeah. And then at the bottom of this chapter, like the end, it's the mother is leaving. She's talking about how she's like, yeah, we're going. And the father's like, I don't want to go. And Jeanette's like, please, Dad, please, you're the father of the family, we need you.
Yeah, all the children were like chanting that they needed him for like their safety and for like their well-being. And
Yeah, so then at the very end, he decided to join.
he came out and like stood and looked at them for a second, and then
Yeah.
he threw the cigarette into the yard and
Oh, yeah.
told the mom to scoot over, and said he was driving.
Oh, wow. So then the next section is the section where they have picked up and they moved to Welch, which is in West Virginia, which is where their parents are.
So this is the beginning of part 3.
Yeah.
So
Well, not the beginning of part 3, but like it says it's divided in the book like
Yeah.
weirdly,
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
but it's part of our
The
part
third,
2.
yeah,
third like
section.
All right.
section.
Part 3. I don't know.
Not
What?
part. Okay.
All right. So it starts off talking about the car, which is not really.
It couldn't go over 20 miles an hour.
It was It was just talking about how bad the car was, and they stopped naming the cars because they were all just so bad, and the first two cars had names, and they would call them by their names. What were they, like Black Bug or something?
Yeah.
something like that. But they just stopped naming them because they couldn't afford any other cars. They could afford like the most like low quality car. So
Like the words they used to describe it are like clunker and Oldsmobile and stuff like that.
yeah,
It took him a total of a month to cross country to get to Welch.
there you go.
That would suck.
So yeah,
Oh,
a month.
God.
Yeah.
So then when they arrived, they had never met their father's parents before, so their grandparents on their father's side. So when they arrived, they were like, "Oh, hi," and the grandmother's name was Alma, and that's how they reference her through the
Irma.
Oh, are you? Yeah, you're right.
I think the fact that they call her Irma and that her dad even said to call her Irma was, it kind of characterizes like the dad and his childhood and kind of shows like
The
why he is, yeah.
disrespect he had to his parents.
It also shows like later when they're talking about how so later in the section of like Welch when they're visiting their grandparents, it talks about how one of them was an Uncle Stanley or something. Or no. It was one time when they were in the basement. Irma, isn't that her name?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Irma, she Brian, the younger brother, he went up to talk to her or something, no. Something was happening where she was trying to sew something of hers, or she was trying to sew something of Brian's. I don't know exactly where it is, so I can't use many details. But she grabbed Brian, took him into another room, and Jeanette and like Lori were sitting on the couch, and their parents weren't home. They had left and they gone out to do something. And you just heard Brian like screaming, and he was like, "Stop, please!" And Irma was just like, "Oh, come closer." And Jeanette just assumed like the worst, like the absolute worst. Like she just assumed that she was trying to sexually assault him, and she ran in there and she was like, "Stop!" And then Irma was like, "Don't be disrespectful. I'm your grandmother." And then they got in this huge fight, and like Lori ended up slapping Irma. It was crazy.
Yeah, and like Irma gets fed up so easy with the kids.
Yeah.
Like she asked the mom to tell them to not laugh. Like she was such an
Yeah.
old
And
hag.
this also shows like why I would say the dad's kind of like messed up, because his parents aren't really nice parents, and they don't seem like they've connected as like parents and
Yeah.
children should. And also like the reason like he doesn't call his mom and he doesn't let his kids call his mom like grandma or whatever, it just shows how like distant they were and not how they've never met them before, so obviously they're not that close.
Yeah.
You can like probably like infer that something happened in his childhood.
Yeah,
like
that's what I was gonna get to.
like because even the children were like, did this happen to dad and stuff? Like
Yeah,
they're
because
like,
that's
what?
why he was like such
Yeah.
like shook up, and that's why he was like an alcoholic. They were
Yeah, like there was
this-
such a disconnect
'cause-
between him and his
Because
other immediate
everything
family.
stems from like how you're raised, so who you become is like how you're raised. So they just assumed that like their parents were like this because their parents like treated them this certain way. And that was like even further when they met the mom's mom and their grandparents. They were so completely different, and it was because everything that her mother did was to try to make what's the mom's name? We just kept calling her mom. I don't really know. But she just wanted to make her perfect. And it talked about how she wasn't supporting her dreams of like being an artist, and how she always felt like distant from her mom, and how that probably caused like her problems and everything of not being a good parent. And then that you can infer that the dad was probably abused by his mom, and that's probably why he's an alcoholic to like
It also shows like the verbal like abuse that the dad has towards his kids, especially when he's drunk. You can tell like you maybe like infer that his parents did that to him, so he feels it's okay, because like you're the parent and you're supposed to be in charge of your kids, which is bad parenting.
Yeah, Irma said she slapped like Jeanette's hand and said beggars can't be choosers, and that just shows like how her poor parenting, or how rude she was to her grandchildren, like her 10-year-old grandchildren.
Yeah. So then it talks about how they lived with the dad's parents for a while because they didn't really have enough money to get a place for their own. So while they were living there, they made them stay in the basement, especially after this whole falling out or this fight happened with Irma and then Brian. She made them stay in the basement, and it got super cold, and they talked about how they had to like sleep all in one bed, and they didn't even care because it was so cold, and they were just so miserable. And the parents had to sleep down there too, and yeah.
Okay, and then after that,
But after the whole situation of them living with their grandparents, they hadn't found a place to live yet, but it talks about how they took the children to go enroll into the elementary school, and the mom is talking to the superintendent or the principal or something, and she's trying to convince, this is on like 137. She's trying to convince the head of the
School?
yeah, the school board or whatever, that Jeanette and her her siblings, I can't find the word, are advanced, and they should be placed in like this specific like level of like learning, because they had never had like a actual, they had like jumped around from educations, but they didn't really have
Like the records
yeah.
of what they have done and what grades they've passed and what.
Yeah, it talks about how they didn't have records, and how when they actually got into the school, they were abused. Like especially Jeanette, she was bullied.
Yeah,
But-
she said.
Like, however, like whenever they're conferencing with the principal, the principal can't understand them because their
Yeah.
accents are different. So,
Oh, and with the bullying thing, sorry, you.
Oh no.
Okay, so when Jeanette was bullied, this one girl had, they were like teasing her and hitting her and all that stuff. And then one day the girl saw her help a boy out who was, what was the boy doing?
Oh yeah. Jeanette ended up. I think this other kid was getting bullied too, or something was happening as to where. Hold on. Yeah, because she was talking about the main bully. Her name was like Danita or something, and how she smiled at her and she was really scared of her, and.
Oh yeah, and then the kid Brian that she helped out, that Jeanette had befriended, and because she saw that he was alone too. Because he was African American. She
Yeah.
thought that, oh, she's like a nice person, like maybe I can be friends with her too. So she actually became friends with her bully after she became friends
Here's
with
what it was.
Brian.
A dog was trying to attack a kid, and
Yeah.
she ended up, he was really frightened and he just wouldn't walk, and she ended up like picking up the kid or something like that and walking him home. And then she saw, and the one like leader of the girls who bullied her was standing across the street like looking at her, and she was like, oh, okay. And then she just walked home. And it ended up later being that the next day, the main like leader of like the bullying pack or whatever, she didn't end up like going and picking on her that day. And she was wondering, and then when
She was being nice to her.
yeah, she's being nice to her. And then she was like, oh, that's weird. And she got home, and her grandparents were talking about how the place that I'm not going to say, but they were basically being racist, and they were like, oh, you went into this side of town that only like black people live on. And they were talking about, and they kept saying the N-word, and Jeanette felt really uncomfortable around it, and she told them, she was like, can like stop saying that word, that's a bad word. And then Irma and like the grandfather just got mad, or I think it was just Irma, honestly. Like the grandfather was just
yeah,
because
because Irma was talking a bunch of like racist stuff to was saying a lot of racist stuff that like upsets
Yeah.
Jeanette, so she decides to confront Irma like her parents taught her to.
yeah. And
But
then
when the mom hears about the fight,
yeah, she's like, it's
Yeah.
fine. She's like, Irma is just like, she's a miserable person.
yeah,
And she was like, it's all she knows. She said, you should never hate her, because she's like, I hate Irma. And her mother's like, don't hate anyone, because you should never hate anyone, even your worst enemies, because everyone has something good about them.
yeah, she makes a comparison of Irma to Hitler, I think. Right?
Yeah.
Where's that?
Yeah.
She said, Jeanette said, oh yeah. I said, how about Hitler? What was his redeeming quality? And she said, Hitler loved dogs. Mom said without hesitation. And so this relates what Jeanette is currently going through, the experience with Irma, and how she should never hate her, because even your worst enemies, like there's a positive side to them. She sees this in, what's the bully's name? Like Danita. She sees this in her, especially when she pulls back that one day from not bullying her. She's like, oh, maybe she's a nice person. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it goes into like the winter again.
Yeah.
Her parents decided to go back to
Yeah.
Phoenix to get their stuff, and this is where the stuff with Irma and Brian
Yeah,
happened.
this is the situation with Irma and Brian, because the parents drive all the way back to Phoenix because they dropped everything and they left to come down here. They couldn't bring, especially everything that they left behind when their car broke down, they just left it all there, like the mom's oil paintings and stuff like that, because they couldn't like take it all back. They got it right from a stranger.
And after the whole situation, when her parents came back, they were really, they were very angry, and the kids thought that they were like angry at Irma or something, but they were actually angry at their own children, and they were really confused because they knew that they did nothing wrong, so they were confused as to why they were, and it was probably because like the dad was maybe like scared or
Yeah.
something.
Scared of his parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the Irma like sexually assaulted
Yeah. Okay. We should try to go through the rest quick because we're only in 35 minutes.
We don't have that much left.
Okay.
Okay, so
30 pages. Okay, so they came home and they talked about how the old house that they left was empty, everything was taken, and then they told them about their bikes, and then they were so upset about that. And she talks about how Irma had banished them from their house after this whole situation happened with Brian, because she was like, you guys are banished. Like, I can't believe you would believe that I would do that. So she said she was more upset about the bike than Irma banishing them. And then this whole section is them driving around, and then they found a house, and then they bought it, and it was like there was a bunch of description and imagery that talked about how they were all like slanted and everything was kind of falling apart, and how it had there's really nothing inside.
And the dad plots out a place to build the glass castle,
Yeah.
which Brian and Jeanette are very eager to make.
Yeah, and it was in the backyard or something like that, and then they did the
foundation.
Yeah, they did the foundation for it, and then they ended up not having enough money to pay the garbage pickup, so they dug a hole. Brian and Jeanette came home from school one day, and they were really excited and enthusiastic about building the glass castle, so they dug a huge hole for it, and they were like, yay, our dad is going to start working on it and going towards it. And the mom was like, oh, we don't have enough money to pay the garbage man to come pick up the garbage, so we're gonna start throwing our garbage in the hole you built. And they were like, what?
And the garbage starts to attract rats, and
yeah, so there's just this whole thing. It just happened.
And it gets worse too. The dad brought home paint from an odd job that he had, and they started painting the house, but then it froze on a cold night, so they couldn't finish.
And they talked about how, sorry, you guys get dark. But I just talked about how Jeanette and the children, they were kind of embarrassed. They were like, we need to stop throwing garbage in our backyard. What are people going to think about us? And the parents were like, who cares what other people think about you? People should accept you for who you are. And
they're saying that because they live in the poorest neighborhood, and they're the poorest people in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
I think the garbage part where they put the garbage in the hole, it kind of symbolized every time they would have any hope or any way of coming out of poverty or something to keep them going, something would happen that would take them a step back, and their situation would get worse and worse. Just like this house, it had no bathroom, no heater, no nothing.
And then this also comes makes Jeanette wonder oh, when are we ever gonna go back home? And she talks about, and they're like, what home? And they're talking about Phoenix, and her parents say that they are living here now, so she has to make the best of the situation, and she starts imagining all the stuff that she wants.
Oh yeah, and also it's how Jeanette felt that place in Phoenix was their first home, because at the beginning they were just jumping around from place to place, and her father called it skedaddling or whatever. And that was her first true home. And then when they moved to this place that was so much smaller, and they had that first glimpse of actual life with normal things that most children had at their age and their friends had at that age, that's the home that she wanted, and that's what she envisioned as her home. And she didn't want to live obviously in this place with trash building up in her backyard.
She she did stuff to try to make this home feel like she tried to paint the walls yellow, I think. And I think it was just her trying to have some hope of having what other people see as a normal life, a normal home and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think she gets that from her mom too, because when they moved to Welch in the first place, it's not really a great city, but her mom was there's not many other artists in the area, and she was finding hope. She was I could thrive as an artist or something.
Yeah, it's not a great city at all. There are a lot of fights in Welch, and not only just to fight their enemies, I guess, but so they could fit in, because everyone was fighting. There were street brawls, stabbings, shootings, beatings, a lot of
We're gonna try
abused
to go through it
people.
faster. Okay. We don't make it too long. Okay, so yeah, it just talks about how.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say how then it just talks about how there's a lot of fighting, and how the mom said it was the fightingest town she'd ever seen, which is unsafe.
Yeah, there was one night that their dad came home, and he had lots of gashes on his face and arms, and Jeanette sews it up that evening.
Oh yeah.
And she manages a few stitches, but then
You're good.
Then the next day when she returns home from school, the dad left again. So.
Okay.
And all of this that's happening with her parents, she knows now that if she wants something done, she has to do it herself because her parents are not gonna. They're always gonna hold empty promises and they're not gonna finish what they said they're gonna start.
Yeah, and the dad is spending a lot more time like
It's not
away from
something really
their
smart.
house.
Okay, the whole thing, the whole thing about the promise of the glass castle is that it's like a glass, so it's like see-through.
Mm-hmm.
So those are all the promises that the parents make for them, and I think it's really like ironic how he's planning to build this glass castle that they're gonna live in, and every promise that their parents have like made for them is all like under this one big promise of like that is the one thing that they're going for is the glass castle, and the glass castle is see-through and it's empty, just like the empty promises that their parents are promising.
Yes, and it's like a symbol of like all of the things that they said. Like it's also like with what their dad says. Like even if you build a castle, it'll break easily.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what their dad like.
Yeah.
What like when he
That's
got
how
drunk,
they live their lives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like whatever they always did something very easily to be broken. Like when he got drunk or when he does.
And also, like, as this part of the book goes on, you can see, like, the children, especially Jeanette, getting more disappointed in her father, like, when he's, like, drinking all the time, and she keeps asking him to stop, and she also, at one point, asked her mom why she hasn't gotten a divorce yet, and it just shows, like, from the beginning of the book, she was more loving towards her dad. I mean, she still loves her dad, but she's more disappointed in him now than she was before, and she's like understanding.
And also, since she's the older child, she always has to take responsibility for a lot of the things. So her younger siblings still have more hope than she does. And they talk about how her sister Lori is like likes to read fantasy books and likes to. Sorry.
No, I like smiled at the camera.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, because like her younger siblings haven't given up on their parents yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so then they are talking about how they went to school. And she started 6th grade, and she talked about how her and her brother made fun of because they were so skinny. So she started hiding in the bathroom at lunch, and then once lunch was over, she would go and she would look in the trash and see what people threw away. And she thought it was so interesting, and she was like, how could people throw all this food away? Because she never gets fed. Her parents didn't like feed her at all. Like sometimes they could afford, it says earlier, like they could afford like one ham, and they didn't have any refrigerators or like insulation in their house. So they would cut it and they would eat it for a few days, and then there'd be like maggots in it later. And she was like, Mom, I don't want to eat ham that has maggots in it. And she was like, just cut off the maggot part. And she was like, I don't want to eat that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they were still really poor, and when winter came, like winter brought a lot of problems. Like the children would fight over like the proximity that they could sleep to the stove whenever they had enough coal.
Yeah, and they fought about who got to sleep closest to the animals because they kept them warm, and also they
talk about how also in this their dad is disappearing more and more for a longer amount of days. It goes from like going for a couple of hours to a couple of days to a couple of weeks.
the rest of these
but
pages.
they said the only good thing about winter was it's
Yeah. Just kidding.
it hid like body odor and the odor of their clothing.
Oh yeah, so they didn't have to wash their clothes because they didn't have a washer.
Well, they did. It was just the water froze, so they couldn't use it. So they would go to the laundromat more because the laundromat was kind of warm. So the mom
they got really
splurged.
excited when they went to the laundromat.
And also, like this section also shows like since the dad is away so much, the mom is becoming more of like
The
head.
parent.
Yeah, like because she got like a job that doesn't pay that well, but at least like they bought like an electric heater or something to keep them warm sometimes, and like it just like
But then after they're talking about how it was so cold in their house and they really could not stand how cold it was, they didn't even have coal to light up their whatever
The
thing.
stove thing.
Yeah. And so Brian and Jeanette like rode all over town, and they saw that like trucks that carried coal, sometimes the pieces of coal would fall out, and they would go around town like not on their bikes, they didn't have those anymore, but they would go around town and they would pick up the little pieces of coal just to like provide for themselves because their parents didn't do anything for them. The mom was sitting at home like eating a Hershey's bar because she was like addicted to sugar.
And
Yeah,
also,
she said she was a sugar addict, just like their father was a alcoholic addict.
Yeah.
And it also showed like during this, their mother kind of stepped up in parenting. Not that it was better than it was before, but it wasn't like
Significantly.
it was just because their dad was always away. Their mom tried to do better for them.
Okay,
It
yeah.
was a little bit.
So then it goes into how, it talks about how Lori got burnt by a fire because she tried to start one, which is just really ironic because this whole, like, there's always a situation with fire, like their house got burned down by fire. The first, like, page is like, I was on fire, like, it was really weird.
Yeah.
But then it goes into Irma ended up dying, and, and how Jeanette, when they were at the funeral, she expected her father to be relieved because she thought Irma had some kind of hold on him, and how obviously the way he was because of how Irma raised him. But the kids ended up leaving the funeral, and they were like, oh, ding dong, the witch is dead. And the dad was really offended. And then
Uncle Stanley burns down the farmhouse, I believe.
Yeah.
And then they have to move into an apartment.
oh yeah,
But the apartment has running water, so the family
Yeah.
takes weekends to visit them.
yeah, they would visit their uncle and then the grandpa because they moved out of the house. And one time when they were visiting, we're just gonna try to wrap up. So one time when they were visiting, the father kept getting really drunk, and
There was one time he started playing with like his private parts.
oh no, hold on, wait. So first the father gets really drunk. Jeanette has to go and find him because the mom's like, go find him. You're the one who believes in him. So then again, like, she's pushing her responsibilities on her children. She's like 10 or 11 at the time, and she has to go out and retrieve her drunk father and then get a ride from a stranger home. And so after that, and then there was a part where they found a diamond ring, and they were like, oh, we can sell it, we can eat, finally. And the mom keeps it because she's like, your father never got me another engagement ring after he sold it. And so she keeps it, which is just selfish again because she's not thinking about how much food she could get to feed her children or like to keep them warm because it's so cold outside. And then,
Back to what Jesse was
yeah,
saying.
what were you saying?
I was just saying there was one time that the father or I can't remember if it was the grandpa or the uncle.
It was the uncle. The uncle was like,
yes.
and the mother wasn't even like, oh, we need to like leave or something. She was like, oh, he's so lonely. Like she wasn't even defending her child. She was like, that sucks for him.
And
Like, what?
she said something like that things like that, like when people get arrested for like rape and molesting and stuff. She said it's based on, it's in the eyes of the beholder.
So there was a call and the video kind of ended, but I think that's pretty much our conclusion though.
Yeah.
Well, we're just gonna conclude that basically, the thing that we realized during this discussion is that all the empty promises that their parents like gave them was basically just like that's why they kept like believing that their parents were going to do all these things because they were like, we're gonna do this, but they ended up having to do everything themselves, and they could only rely on themselves.
And the section also characterized Jeanette a little bit more as like what her own views are, and like how her views like are in contrast to her dad's or her mom's.
And it also shows her growing up. It shows
Yeah.
her becoming like
Independent,
less,
she's building her independence from her parents.
She's not really always making excuses for her parents anymore. She's more of becoming her own.
Yeah, she's kind of
person.
becoming more mad at them, and it's like,
She's
why are you
like-
doing that? Why are you not selling the ring? We could give us food.
Yeah, like you're an adult. You should
Yeah.
have responsibilities.
So yeah, that's all.
Thank you.
Bye.